Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute. Josh Hasten here, broadcasting from the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. I am here with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. And Alex, we're still here. We're still breathing. We're alive. It's a beautiful day in the city of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. We're here, buddy.
We are still here. I would say that didn't seem as automatic the other night when literally ballistic missiles were being intercepted and exploded right above my house and yours on late on Saturday night, about 2 a.m. The entire nation almost running into their safe rooms, wondering how successful an Iranian missile and drone attack could be.
Yeah, I'm still catching up on my sleep Saturday night up till about 4 a.m. with Iran. We're going to break it down here in a second. With Iran launching those UAVs and missiles at Israel. And then last night I had a wedding, so I'm working on very little sleep. And I think most of the country yesterday morning kind of slept in. But let's break it down here. 185 UAVs launched by Iran.
These are drones.
Drones targeting Israel. 36 cruise missiles. 110 surface-to-surface missiles. According to Israeli sources, about 99% of what was launched towards Israel was intercepted using the Israeli air defense systems as well as the air defense systems of Israel's allies, including the United States. According to the IDF spokesperson, most of the targets were intercepted outside of Israeli territory, and they also announced a number of hits were detected at a military base in the south of the country, where there was minor damage to the infrastructure. But overall, again, 99% intercepted. There is one child who was wounded in a Bedouin town in southern Israel. Let's get to it. First of all, you have Iran, for the first time ever, striking not through a proxy, not through Hezbollah, not through Hamas, directly striking Israel. Your comments on that?
Well, first of all, the idea that Iran could strike Israel via proxy, and that's okay, and that if it strikes directly, that's not okay, is a ridiculous. It's a ridiculous premise just to begin with. Iran's been attacking at Israel for a long time. It's been their military strategy to fund and arm these proxies. So every time Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis attack Israel, that's Iran attacking Israel. Iran is the head of that terror octopus. But certainly they raised the stakes with this strike simply because of the nature of this. It was the largest drone strike in the history of warfare, sending 185 drones simultaneously, but also the sending of ballistic missiles at Israel. Hamas has been sending Qassams. Sometimes Hezbollah can send Katyusha rockets. These are much smaller grade rockets. Ballistic missiles got to Israel from Iran in about 10 minutes' time. They went up through the atmosphere. They come down at the speed of gravity, essentially. They are extremely large. They are believed to have had over 500 kilogram payloads, and they could cause immense damage. Definitely an escalation. And if this isn't the escalation that shows Israel and the rest of the international community that Iran is serious when they say death to Israel, then I don't know what kind of attack it would take short of a nuclear attack and the complete eradication of the state of Israel.
Death to Israel. They also say death to America very often. It's important to remember that. And Iranian propaganda, full steam, claiming the targets were military, but you and I both know from our bomb shelters that these were not just military targets. These were civilian targets. I want to talk about a theory which is gaining weight, if you will, that the Iranian strike with the drones, with the ballistic missiles, was perhaps coordinated, that this was a coordinated response, perhaps even with the United States and other parties around the world against Israel, sort of a limited response, but coordinated. And what are you hearing about that? I don't know if you want to call it a theory or that assessment of what happened the other night.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that you said. First, you said that it was a limited attack. There might have been limits, but it was a very, very large attack. Over 100 ballistic missiles fired. That's not like a small attack. Israel struck a consulate in Damascus in a singular airstrike, and here was 110 ballistic missiles plus another 185 drones and another 30-something cruise missiles. This was a very large attack, and you can argue that it was intended to inflict mass damage. Now, it didn't inflict mass damage in part because of the Israeli air defense, the superior air defense. The question of whether it was coordinated. We already started to see in Israel, not just in Israel, rather in all of the international mainstream media, warnings that Iran was going to be attacking Israel in retribution for the consular strike that took out 7 Iranian generals within 24 to 48 hours. Apparently, that was intelligence that was leaked by the United States. So the question is, how did they get that intelligence? We continue to see reports now that Jordan, Turkey, other countries were also made aware that this attack was going to occur. We saw that other nations, including Jordan and Saudi Arabia, closed their airspace during the hours in which the attack was scheduled to take place. And we saw that the United States, the UK, and others had moved missile defense assistance for Israel into position to counter that attack. So this was a highly telegraphed attack. The question is, did the U.S. and Israel potentially know about it because it was directly communicated on purpose, or because there was intelligence that they were able to intercept? There is a theory here that this was a fully coordinated attack that was meant to... Then the question is, again, was it meant to inflict full damage, or was it meant to inflict limited damage? And certainly there are those that say this was a major attack that was intent to inflict mass casualties, mass damage, and others that say, oh, look, that Israel knocked out 99% of it out of the sky. They knew that was going to happen, and therefore you can surmise that this was a coordinated strike.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I mean, did Iran want to cause mass damage or avoid damage? And I think that is something that will play out over time. I think we'll see down the line.
Well, we're probably never going to know the answer to that question, because ultimately limited damage was caused. They said that 5 missiles actually struck. This is a new report. Struck the Nevatim Air Force Base in the south, which is where most of the F-35s are located. So, clear that Iran did try to target military targets. The United States put out a statement afterwards saying that Iran only targeted military targets. And that's the question, right? That's another signal to you that this is a potentially coordinated strike, because when ballistic missiles are sent across several countries into the atmosphere and are coming down towards Israel, how do you know if those ballistic missiles... Israel's a tiny country. How do you know if those ballistic missiles were going towards a military target or civilian targets? I mean, certainly to us civilians that saw these things being blasted out of the sky in Star Wars-like fashion, right overhead, it didn't seem to us like they were going towards just military targets. But the United States said it was going only to military targets in their official statement from President Biden. So another indication that perhaps it was a coordinated attack. If it was a military target, it looks like they probably did try to take out whatever they could take out. They did strike the base, and perhaps just very good fortune that those 5%, those 5 ballistic missiles didn't cause more damage than they did.
I saw some unbelievable footage of the missiles themselves landing near the Dead Sea area. I mean, these are huge, huge missiles. At the same time, you and I both saw in Jerusalem, Gush Etzion, and throughout the country, essentially Star Wars taking place over our heads. The Israeli interceptors, all our different various missile systems, anti-missile systems, taking down the UAVs, the drones, as well as the cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. Let's take a look at a video from inside the cockpit of some of the Israeli fighter planes shooting down the projectiles launched at Israel. Simply amazing video that we have there, Alex. And the question then is, after we broke that down, was this a victory for Israel, or was this, obviously we shot down the rockets and whatnot, but is this a victory? Is there much more to come? Was this a failure? The fact that they were able to even do it, we were able to even get to this point. What do you think about that?
Well, certainly what we saw was the major success of Israeli missile defense systems. So for the first time, we saw these systems, really going into action. We've never seen these types of long-range missiles fired at Israel. We know that the Iron Dome can shoot Qassam rockets out of the sky with 90% efficiency. We didn't really know if they would be able to take out ballistic missiles, which is a totally different ball game. And so, sure, we saw a major success of these systems. I think Iran believed that Israel did have significant missile defense and could shoot a very high proportion of these missiles out of the sky. You can just look at Russian attacks on Ukraine and see, how effective Ukraine has been at shooting some of these missiles out of the sky, and they've had some success. Certainly not anything like the success that Israel had. Israel had that success in part because other countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United States, the UK, France, all participating in the effort. We don't really have full details, statistics on how many were shot out by Israel, even though we do seem to have indications that most were taken out by Israel, but we don't know what percentage of that. Was that 55%? Was that 85%? We really don't know. So then the question is, if this attack was not highly telegraphed, if the other nations weren't included in beforehand that this was going to happen, if all these other systems were not put into place, would we still have had the type of success that we had? We don't know that. But yes, certainly major success. But does that constitute victory? Is a defensive strategy a victory? Maybe it is for Hamas, by the way, but for Israel, if they shoot 110 or so ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and UAVs at us, and we shoot them out of the sky, that doesn't represent a strategic victory. Rather, Iran now has more information about how the systems work, and they've also established, let's say, a new normal, a new status quo. Beforehand, they were only able to attack by proxies, and they were able to get away with it. Now they've attacked directly, and we don't know whether or not they're going to be able to get away with it, but certainly if they have the capacity to fire this again tomorrow or the next day or the next time Israel strikes at one of their military installations, movements of weapons or personnel in Syria or Lebanon, and they can do this, then no, Israel's not scored any kind of strategic victory in this strike so far.
So the question then becomes, how should Israel respond? When should Israel respond? And I ask, will we act like October 6th? Will we have that type of mentality? No harm, no foul. Will that be the mentality? Or will Israel respond like October 8th, as we did after Hamas brutally attacked our people in southern Israel and we went to war? Will Israel respond in kind and act that way as a result of Iran's intent, not necessarily how they, the results of what happened, the fact that we were successfully able to shoot down 99% of what was shot at us?
Well, we do see some parallels between October 7th attack and this attack. Certainly not in the case of how many people were killed or injured. October 7th attack killed and injured and kidnapped so many people that it demanded a response. There was no way that the state of Israel was going to allow that to happen without a response. But what did we see on October 7th? We saw that the United States said, okay, airstrikes, we understand that, but we don't want you to do a ground invasion. Here, the United States saying, yes, you have a right to defend yourself, sure, but we don't think that you should retaliate, number one. Two, we're not going to join in any retaliation. Three, if you do retaliate, it's clear that we didn't have any part of that. We didn't want it to happen. There's reports in the New York Times that Netanyahu, even that night, and the War Cabinet wanted to immediately respond, and obviously there must be battle plans in place for strikes on Iran, and that in a call with Biden, Netanyahu and the War Cabinet were talked off the ledge, so to speak. The War Cabinet has approved apparently some kind of a response. There were threats last night that maybe a strike would have been launched last night. Now you have members of the War Cabinet saying that Israel reserves the right to strike back at the time of its choosing. I would imagine that the more time that goes along, the less likely major retaliation is, but there's no way to know. And then also you saw signals from Yoav Gallant, who is the defense minister, and Benny Gantz, who's a member of the War Cabinet, both of them saying that this is an opportunity to create an international alliance against Iran. And when you hear that kind of talk, what that means is they're trying to do diplomacy right now and get other countries around the world to censure Iran, to say how bad they were at the United Nations, and potentially to put sanctions on Iran. And when you hear that kind of talk, that also gives the indication that perhaps Israel's not going to react militarily. I would suggest that probably most of this country here in Israel, while they don't want to be in a massive war with Iran and Hezbollah firing as much of their arsenal as they possibly can at us, we understand that if we don't attack now, it's simply kicking the can down the road, and that this is a war that's going to take place either today or next year or the year after, and you're only kicking the can down the road. And I think that I think most Israelis that I have discussed this with would expect Israel to make a definitive response to restore deterrence, which apparently was lost. Both lost before October 7th, lost before Saturday night, and if something's not done, deterrence could be lost for the long term.
Just so people should understand the reality of the situation here in Israel, we're talking about 48 hours or so after the attack. Schools are open again. It's business as usual. I told you I went to a wedding last night, joyous event. People are going about their business. In terms of the United States, a direct quote from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, in his conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said, "You got a victory today. Be content with this victory." This according to a recap there of the conversation held the other night. At the same time, you have Minister Benny Gantz saying that Israel will, in fact, exact a price from Iran. Let's check out the video.
אתמול יצאה איראן למתקפה על ישראל ופגשה את עוצמתה של מערכת הביטחון הישראלית. איראן היא בעיה עולמית, היא אתגר אזורי והיא גם סכנה לישראל. ואתמול התייצב העולם באופן ברור ביחד עם ישראל מול הסכנה. ישראל נגד איראן, העולם נגד איראן. זו התוצאה. זהו הישג אסטרטגי שעלינו למנף למען ביטחון ישראל. האירוע הזה לא נגמר. את הברית האסטרטגית ומערך שיתוף הפעולה האזורי שבנינו ועמד במבחן המשמעותי שלו צריך לחזק דווקא עכשיו. ישראל הוכיחה אתמול שהיא עוגן של עוצמה צבאית וטכנולוגית ועוגן של ביטחון במזרח התיכון. בזכות מפקדי צה"ל ולוחמיו, בזכות הטכנולוגיה, בזכות התעשיות. מול האיום של איראן אנחנו נבנה קואליציה אזורית ונגבה מאיראן את המחיר באופן ובזמן שנכונים לנו. והחשוב מכל, מול הרצון של אויבינו לפגוע בנו, אנחנו נתאחד ונתחזק. גם היום עלינו לזכור שטרם השלמנו את המשימות שלנו, ובראשן השבת החטופים והסרת האיום מתושבי הצפון והדרום. אנחנו נמשיך במערכה בנחישות ובאחריות, ויחד ננצח.
At the same time, you mentioned Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant stressing the importance of keeping the U.S. informed about any potential responses to Iranian actions. We are now at a stage where it's wait and see. But I'd like to let the viewers know that yesterday you and alongside Yaakov Lapin, military correspondent for JNS, had a very popular webinar for more information to really delve into the situation with Iran. Go to JNS TV and check out yesterday's webinar.
Yeah, I mean, we went really for an hour. We dissected every military element of the strike, everything from what Iran sent, when they sent it, how they sent it, to the coordinated response, how Israel performed, how this alliance of regional and international partners shot these things out of the sky, whether it was a success, what they hit, and whether or not Israel should respond and how. So a very in-depth webinar, and if you want more information, I definitely I strongly urge you to listen. Yaakov Lapin, our military affairs correspondent, is one of the best in the business. So just go to JNS TV and watch that webinar for more information.
Let's not forget, though, Alex, we are still at war. We are at war on two fronts. We are at war down in the south against Hamas, and there's this war before the war, if you will, with Hezbollah in the north. They continue to launch rockets, dozens of rockets. It barely even made the news. So much was focused on the head of the snake, Iran, little less so on Hezbollah. But the fact remains that they launched more and more rockets at Israel over the last 48 hours as well.
I think that's really important. Even as this was taking place, as missiles were coming in from Iran, there were missiles being fired at Israel from Lebanon. They struck, actually, I think one of them struck in Kiryat Shmona. And the IDF was busy really operating on multiple fronts, striking inside Lebanon at many sites during the hours when drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles were on their way to Israel. Israel was busy striking. They struck even in North Lebanon at a weapons depot. So it should be very clear that this is a multi-pronged attack by Iran on Israel. Also, Houthis fired. And we saw at the same time that Iran was firing that some of the missiles also came from Iraq. So we're basically being attacked by multiple fronts simultaneously.
And yesterday down in Gaza, it was reported that 2 IDF reservist brigades were sent back into Gaza. Hamas also at the same time, once again, it seems like almost every single day there's a new proposal for a hostage exchange, a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, if you will. Hamas once again rejecting the latest ceasefire talks being held with the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar. More and more talks. It's almost every day Hamas continues to reject any sort of compromise, and their point is that they don't want Israeli troops in Gaza, and that's not going to happen. We still have the Rafah operation, which we haven't even started yet, by the way. There were reports this morning that perhaps Israel's pushing off the Rafah operation. I want you to address that as well.
Right. So what we've seen is, and we discussed this last week, that Israel pulled out 4 of its battalions from the Gaza Strip, leaving only a single battalion in this corridor right down the middle of the Gaza Strip, basically separating the north and the south. What have we seen in the last week? Well, Hamas understands that you have a much smaller Israeli military presence in the Strip, and they are continuing to now spread out over the Gaza Strip. We've seen videos. I just watched videos this morning of Hamas operatives standing on top of these aid convoys, with machine guns pointed and honking and being escorted by ambulances that obviously Hamas is driving. And so they are trying to take control again of the distribution of this aid. So they're basically refusing to disappear as the entity that is in charge of governing the Strip. So Israel has certainly lost some significant momentum by pulling out these troops. There are suggestions now that what this attack does, especially if Israel gives in to the U.S. demands not to counterattack Iran, that they may have more political capital to now quickly go into Rafah. But at the same time, the situation in Rafah is contained. Israel had not gone in the last several weeks. It probably in terms of that operation, the IDF feels that if they go in now, or if they go in 3 weeks or 4 weeks from now, it's the same operation. They might have to do some more cleanup in other areas of the Strip for the reasons why I discussed. But Gaza doesn't really, and Hamas doesn't really pose a major threat to the Israeli home front anymore, really not since October 7th, October 8th. So you have this theory that you can sort of let this situation in Gaza fester for as long as you need while you take on the other proxies, either Hezbollah or you attack Iran directly. So there's 2 ways of looking at it. Definitely the one which says, let's take care of things one at a time. Let's go from threats smaller to greatest. That would be first Hamas in Gaza, then Hezbollah in Lebanon, then deal with Iran and its nuclear program. Or you can know that you did a lot of damage over here. Just let the situation sit. It's contained for the most part, and go deal with the head of the terror octopus or its larger proxies sooner. So we have to wait to see what Israel's strategy at this point is going to be, but certainly an opportunity to change the strategic decision-making.
And if all that wasn't enough, there's also the Judea and Samaria front. This is just a terrible story, and this probably would have been top story if Iran didn't strike and if we weren't at war with Hamas. An Israeli 14-year-old boy was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by Arab terrorists in Judea and Samaria. A young shepherd who went out with his flock, again, 14 years old, Binyamin Achimir, may God avenge his blood. He was found after going missing while shepherding from the Gal farm on Friday. This is in the Binyamin area near Ramallah, just northeast of Ramallah. You had a mass search party on Shabbat. Many Israelis participating, and eventually a drone identified Achimir's body on Saturday morning. Just tragic, terribly sad. It reminds me personally, I know of when Kobe Mandel was murdered back in 2002. They got to avenge his blood as well. And again, it would have been top story, but because of the reality, it wasn't.
Well, you remember when the 3 boys were kidnapped?
Yeah,
in
2014.
In 2014, and that was essentially the casus belli, the reason for going to war with Hamas, and at that time, and we had like a comparatively to what's going on now, a minor altercation with Hamas, but a very serious escalation at the time over the kidnapping and murder of these 3 boys. And here, like you said, you have the murder of a young boy who was not going out to do any harm, and you see this kid. It was really just a 14-year-old kid with curly hair,
family from Jerusalem,
and it's being, like you said, almost ignored because it's not 110 ballistic missiles and 100-something drones, but this is a reality. There's just been consistent murderous attacks inside Judea and Samaria. Iran is also part of that. There were reports this past week that Iran has been smuggling weapons into Judea and Samaria. You have Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad that are also active in Judea and Samaria. And then at the same time, the Palestinian Authority, which is supposedly that moderate force in Judea and Samaria, commonly known as the West Bank, is also a murderous entity. We've seen multiple shooting attacks take place by members of the Palestinian Authority security forces who are American and Jordanian trained and armed, and they are incentivizing murder. They pay murderers to commit acts of murder, and when Israel puts them in prison, they get paid salaries. If they get killed by civilians that are responding to terror or by IDF troops, their families get stipends for these so-called martyrs that are killed in the act of committing first-degree murder. So the situation in Judea and Samaria is not good. It is not a good situation at all. But like we said, Iran, very big threat. Hezbollah, very big threat. This war in Gaza, something that is very big in the international stage. Like the killing of a 14-year-old boy, unfortunately, in Judea and Samaria, not considered a big deal in the same way that American others are saying, a 7-year-old girl who has had to have surgery for major head trauma and injuries, and we don't know if she'll live, God willing. She's a Bedouin, by the way, but she is an Israeli resident, that people don't care. If there's people expect Israel to tolerate it. Okay, a 14-year-old boy gets killed, a 7-year-old girl got hurt, big deal. But Israel is supposed to provide safety for all of its citizens, and is supposed to provide security, and that means taking out the terror threats that are both surrounding it and within it.
The IDF, of course, continue to search for the perpetrators, and the difference between us and them is as they pay terrorists and their families for carrying out these murderous attacks, we value each and every life here in Israel. That's the difference between good and evil. That is the war we are waging on all those fronts. That's the difference between us and terror organizations like Hamas and Iran, the head of the snake. And I won't forget about that 14-year-old, and please God, we will find and bring to justice those who carried out this heinous crime. And that's going to do it for today. I mean, we can sit and talk about Iran for many hours, but I would suggest, again, go to JLTV, check out the webinar yesterday with Alex Traiman and Yaakov Lapin, and continue to follow all the breaking news on jns.org and all of the video content on JNSTV on YouTube. Shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for everything he does behind the scenes here. And please God, Alex we will not be here next week because it's the holiday of Passover, so we are not going to be recording for the next 2 weeks. I don't know the schedule of all the other shows here on JNS.
I think we'll take a week off. We'll try to figure out a way to
get people the content from Israel. Yeah. We'll figure something out. But for those who are celebrating a happy and meaningful and safe Passover to you and your families, and of course, continue to pray for the brave men and women of the IDF. Please God, the hostages as well will be rescued and will be returned home to their families. You are watching Jerusalem Minute. We are recording from the heart of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel, and the Jewish people. Josh Hasten here with Alex Traiman. Have a great week, everybody. Happy Passover to all.